You have called us by our name. We belong to you. You have called us by our name, and we are yours. You have called us by our name. We belong to you. You have called us by our name, and we are yours. How I hope you liked your lunch. Now it's time to sit. Please would you take your seats so we can start. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome back from what I hope was an enjoyable lunch. And as we gently but rather immediately invite you to take your places, we would like to honor everyone's time this afternoon and shepherd you to that promised free evening that will start the sooner that we commence. So with that in mind, welcome back. And take note on your schedule this afternoon, we are going to rewind the future. Sister Belinda, did you know that both of us were at the NRVC Keys to the Future program 10 years ago in June of 2012 in San Antonio? You remember that, I'm sure. Do you know who else was there? Sister Donna Del Santo, SSJ, was there. Sister Pat Dowling, CBS, was there. Sister Sarah Colas, OSF, was there in June of 2012 for the NRVC Keys to the Future. And Sister Karen Ann Lorcher, OSB. Sister Anita Quigley, SHCJ. Sister Anna Marie Sanders, IHM. Carol Schuchschreiber, and Sister Debbie Borneman were all in San Antonio in 2012 for the NRVC Keys to the Future. There were 90 people gathered in San Antonio some 10 years ago to unpack the 2009 NRVC Cara study on recent vocations to religious life. And that's where Sister Belinda and I met for the very first time. And we've been attached ever since, very gratefully. As part of that Keys to the Future process, the NRVC produced a video, as you'll recall, with 8 newer entrants to religious life, which highlighted the key themes from the aforementioned NRVC Cara study among women and men who entered religious life from 1993 to 2008. Now moving forward, the NRVC has replicated this study 10 years later for those who entered religious life from 2003 to 2018. Which we now refer to as the 2020 study of recent vocations to religious life.
But let's back up a little bit further and get some perspective. Please stand if you entered religious life in 1993 or after. Or after. I can't count this quickly, but that looks like about half of us. It's quite a large group of people here. And that includes me. I think it includes Adam. So it's important to understand this because in 1992, 30 years ago, Sister Miriam Eucharitis and Father David Nygren conducted the first in-depth study of women and men's religious communities, institutes, the future of religious order studies. They gathered data from more than 10,000 members of women and men's religious institutions to generate a picture of possible futures. This seminal research examined what changes must occur if religious life is to remain a vital gift to the church in the next millennium, which we are in. This study called for a radical response to the gospel and a life more aligned with serving those who are poor and living on the margins. Today's roundtable conversation brings back 5 of the 8 newer entrants who were featured on the video Moving Forward in Hope from the 2009 survey. Benedictine brother Patrick Wimbush and Augustinian friar Kevin DePrinzio had other commitments, so they will be joining us. They videotaped their responses and will be joining us that way. Together, they will join the other entrants to ponder, rewind the future, and to share with us their insights and lived experiences since 1992 and 2012. They will be joined by Sister Miriam Eucharitis and Sister Debbie, who will moderate the conversation. Are we still moving forward in hope? What do they perceive as to be the keys to the future for religious life now?
And so it gives me great pleasure now to introduce formally our roundtable participants. Sister Ana Dura professed her final vows in 2010 as a Sister of the Redeemer. Sister Sarah Collis professed final vows, perpetual vows, in 2011 as a Sister of St. Francis of Dubuque. Sister Angela Gertzma professed perpetual vows in 2010 as an Apostle of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Sister Debbie, who is moderating the conversation, made her perpetual profession as a Sister of Saints Cyril and Methodius in 2001. And as mentioned, we welcome Sister Miriam Eucharitis, who professed perpetual vows as a Sister of St. Joseph of Carondelet of Albany in 1970. And Sister Miriam, as mentioned, engaged in research with Father David Nygren, Vincentian, in 1992. Sister Miriam currently ministers as co-director of vocations for her province and co-director of novices for their congregational novitiate. I'd now like to invite Sister Debbie to take over moderating our panel. Sister Debbie?
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much for that introduction, that warm introduction. So during the pandemic, the NRVC office received word that we had to move our national office as CTU was selling the building. And so that meant vacating a space that we had occupied for 24 years. You know what that means. A lot of books and paper, right, to move and to decide what do we keep and what do we take to our new space. While we were moving our items and looking through things, I found this key. Okay. And I was so curious because I was certain I've never seen this key before, but it had an NRVC tag on it, so it must be important, right? So I tried all the doors and it didn't open anything, and Maureen said, no, the safe doesn't take that kind of key. So I started to ponder, what is this key and why do we have it? It took me several weeks until I remembered it was one of the keys to the future that we gave away in 2012. And that's what started the conversation. I wonder where Sister Anna is today. I wonder where Sister Sarah is, Brother Patrick, Brother Luis, Sister Emmanuel. Do they still have hope? Do they still believe the things that they said in the video? Was it a video made with integrity? Or did they feel as if they were contributing to a narrative that perhaps they no longer believed? And that's when I got in touch with each one of them and said, what would it be like if we had a little mini reunion? And they knew me enough to know that it just meant more than just a little mini reunion in front of 200 people. And what I want to share with you about that is that, and then I paused and I remembered Sister Miriam. And I remembered her groundbreaking study. And you know, when we say there's no coincidences, that when we published the video in 2012, 10 years ago, she published her research 30 years ago in 1992. She had to be a part of this conversation. She had to, because we're living religious life intergenerationally, interculturally, and across congregations. So I called you up, Miriam, and I said, what do you think? She said, first, I'll think about it. And then said, I really would like this opportunity. So that's how this conversation got started. So I want you to, for yourselves to imagine that we're going to have a conversation amongst ourselves, but then we're going to turn it into a conversation at the tables that you'll be having it amongst yourselves. What would you do if you found a key to the future? What would you do? Let your imagination soar. And with that, we're going to go rewind the future and show the introduction from the video 10 years ago.
Sister Anna Dura, Sisters of the Holy Redeemer. I think a bishop or an archbishop was giving a talk, and all I can remember is this one question he threw out. Is God calling you to be a sister, a brother, a priest? And I felt like that was God, right, I remember in my heart feeling that, and I filled up with tears because I thought, oh my gosh, God is calling me, but I can't do that. Do I really want to do that?
Brother Patrick Wimbush, Benedictine monk of Newark Abbey. I made a visit to the monastery, and as soon as I walked in the door, I felt right at home, which is something about the place that was just attractive.
Sister Angela Gertzma, Apostles of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I told the young man I was dating, when John Paul II said that was me. I'm going to be a sister. And he said, okay, listen, you're excited. You just saw the Pope, you don't even know what religious life is. I said, I know that, but I'm definitely called to it.
Kevin DePrinzio, Augustinians of the province of St. Thomas of Villanova. There were 10 friars at the high school at the time. The way they interacted with each other, the way they were in the classroom, the way they preached, that I thought, they're an interesting group of guys. What's that about? And then slowly I realized that this curiosity turned into an attraction for me.
Sister Emanuela Lee, Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth. My whole life was in Catholic school, so I was surrounded by sisters and priests. I'm always curious, I'm like, what are they doing, at home? Are they watching TV? Are they praying the whole time? Do they have time to go for shopping and on the phone and all of this? So when I enter religious life, it's just one word, curiosity.
Father Joseph Manuth, Dominican province of St. Albert the Great. It was at the university, I guess, where my friends started to talk about possibilities and maybe the religious life. And so the thought was in the back of my head, a couple priests had mentioned the idea to me, and it was somehow appealing. The idea started to grow, how awesome it would be to give up everything and follow Christ.
Brother Jesus Alonso, Congregation of Holy Cross. So I was there for 6 weeks with the brothers. And then I moved to my apartment, and I was still dating at the time, but I became I missed having those conversations and their company. So I would always go back about once a week. And that's when everything really began taking form, where I said, well, this is something I want to try.
Sister Sarah Colas, Sisters of St. Francis of Dubuque, Iowa. I started imagining what it would be like for me to be a sister. Now this is unusual because I'm from Texas. I really wasn't around a lot of sisters growing up. I already knew that I wanted to study theology, and that was separate in my mind from the sister thing as I thought about it. I had not told anyone at this point that I was considering being a sister, and because who would believe me?
I said, I have to do something about this. I can't just think about this anymore. I have to do something. So the parish that I was attending, there was an advertisement for a discernment retreat weekend. So I said, I'm doing this. I'm going. I had not shared with anyone at that point that I was considering religious life.
It took a while. And the reason it took a while, because I think I had to convince myself that, in fact, this is how I wanted to live my life.
The National Catholic Youth Conference, and that was held in St. Louis. And the sister was talking, and she said, if you open the door of your heart this much, the Holy Spirit will get in. And I was sitting there, I was like, my door's open this much, nothing's happening.
The very first question she asked me was, are you interested in religious life? Would you like to come and spend time with us? And I was like, wow, you know what? Nobody ever asked me that question. And so I was like, sure, I want to come and see.
As I was discerning, I knew some religious who I thought were very good, holy men. I admired very much the work they were doing. They seemed to be alive with acts of charity and concern for the poor.
My family is supportive, but they don't entirely understand. The distance from where the community is and where my home is means there's not a lot of interaction.
It's not meant to always be explained by words. It's something that makes sense when you live it and when you're called to live it. There's going to be times where you just go, what is this all about? For me, to keep questioning it is a deepening of that original call.
So I entered the monastery July 1st, 1999, at the age of 18. And I'm now 31, and I love it.
So, a lot of memories. A lot of memories. We were talking about gathering in South Bend, and the group really didn't get a chance to even meet each other because of the taping schedule. People were coming and going throughout the day, and really the first time they saw the videos whenever we published it. So the first question is, Sister Anna, what was your reaction when you saw the video, and how did it reflect you and your vocation?
Well, first of all, I can't believe it's been 10 years. So, but I remember not wanting to watch it, let's put it that way. But when I had the courage to watch it, I was deeply touched. Again, not having met all the participants in this, I just sensed this connection. These are my peers, and we have such shared experiences of the life. And it really was genuine to what my experience was at that time. And so it was just this kind of awe, I think, watching these men and women having gone through the same stuff and expressing it in ways perhaps different, but I think felt the same. So certainly I was, just like I said, in awe. And now I did watch it again before coming here, and there is a timeless message in it. I think because it speaks to the core truths of religious life, which 10 years later, I still feel a connection with, and I think that's because those are those core truths. So very grateful for the experience, even though it was very, I think all of us were a little intimidated by it, but has become a wonderful part of our lives.
Thank you. So let's hear what Brother Patrick has to say in his recorded message to us.
My initial reaction when I first watched the Keys to the Future video, how good it came out. It was nice to see a diverse group of religious participate in this project. We all come from different backgrounds, which made this project very interesting. Looking back 10 years ago, I saw religious life from a different perspective because of my experience up to that point. I am grateful to God that my vocation is still strong. As vocation directors, we know what it takes to attract new members, which is the easy part. But the challenge for us is to keep and sustain new members in our congregations. When I look back at the questions that were asked of us based on the 4 themes from the 2009 NRVC Cara study on community life, the Eucharist, communal prayer, and visibility, we all gave appropriate answers based on our experiences. These questions, 10 years later, are still relevant today. I hope that congregations who have viewed this video were able to follow some of our suggestions.
Thank you. So, Sister Miriam, what do you remember about your research when it was published in 1992? And how did the key messages picked up by the media reflect you, your vocation, and religious life?
It seems forever ago. And it's funny sitting here as the grandmother of the group. In my community, I'm used to having the other women be the grandmothers, and I'm among the younger people. So it's kind of interesting to be the older person here. The 90s, David and I worked on this study for over 3 years. And the 90s were an interesting time. It was about 25 years after the council. And the differences in implementing the council were beginning to surface. There was increasing tension, I think, around the, I don't know whether you want to call them people who wanted to remain in a more traditional style of religious life, and folks who wanted to experiment with ministry, living, dress, whatever. And so we were about to publish the study that we had done in the midst of that. And so there was no little tension in the background. And what I recall in doing that was David and I said, we have to simply be faithful to what we found to maintain our integrity and the integrity of the project. And it was exciting when we did publish, that folks said, oh, somebody is finally saying it. You know, as the X-Files say, the truth is out there. And so we had a lot of affirmation there, and issues around ministry, around preferred ways of living, were not as serious as people's commitment to the life. There was a little pullback in the press. Getting ready for this, I pulled out some of the news reports, the things, and the one that shook us the most was when the Chicago Tribunes ran the story with a headline that said, "Religious orders shunning the poor." And that was a learning for us, that you can't control your story when it's out there. But the affirmation that we got, the interest, I think was something that moved things along, and it's been exciting in these past many years to really see what people have done, how they've taken it. I was recently at the LCWR for their hubs that looked at collaborative leadership, and at each one, at least 2 or 3 people came to me and said, we had to read your study when we were novices. And we had a conversation, and they talked about how it was a significant element in their congregations as they planned for their future and moved forward. And it was, I think, the kind of stimulus to conversation that have gone on, not only within religious communities, but I think what this did was broaden the conversation across congregations. And the mantra that we ended the study with was, we must be faithful to our founding vision and responsive to unmet needs today.
Sister Sarah, this is a multifaceted question. What has changed for you in the past 10 years life? And is there a timeless message you or someone else said in the video that lovingly haunts you? Meaning, what still holds deep meaning for you?
Well, that's a 2-part question. So if I answer one part and need to be reminded of the other, feel free to remind me. I think when I review that video from 10 years ago, I think my love of community shines through, and I think that is very true still today. When I reflect on what's different in the past 10 years, especially maybe even the last few years, the words abundance and fragility really come out for me in relation to my experience of religious life. I entered in 2003, and so my 19 years experience in religious life, I would say all of it has been about abundance. I've always had what I needed, but more than that, always, so much more than that. Every opportunity, this kind of upheaval of this paradigm shift moment in religious life, I have found has also been a time of possibility and kind of a way to choose your own adventure in religious life. And perhaps even being one of the youngest in my community, that lets me choose. I have choices about where I would focus my energy. That allows me to be really creative, and I'm very grateful for that. These last few years, I would also see fragility in us to a greater degree. Maybe it's related to COVID, maybe COVID escalated it. Part of it, I think, has to do with just the internal shifts that I'm seeing in my own congregation. I think with our numbers and such, and I think the older sisters are in a place where they're no longer insulated by sheer numbers from the shifts in a way that they had been. So I think that's part of the fragility that's coming up that I see and watch them go through. I've seen them I've had some really meaningful conversations with them about the vow of poverty and that limitations invite us to a new discovering of the vow of poverty. But also, I pair abundance and fragility together because I've just started a new ministry in a new place in August, and I wasn't too sure what living community would look like for me in this new place. And a sister who had been retired at the Mother House for 7 years volunteered to come and move with me, enter into a different kind of upheaval again for her that she had never imagined, to be supportive of me in a new ministry. And that has been such graced space that is abundance and fragility all interwoven together. So I believe that was the first part of the question.
And the second one, what's that phrase or thought that lovingly haunts you from the video?
I think the thing that most lovingly haunts me from the experience of that whole Moving Forward in Hope DVD process was really Angela.
There we go, everybody.
Get ready, y'all. So Sister Debbie shared that we were at different places. We never really all came together in one place. But I was right in the middle of the recording, so I think I actually met all of the participants. I think I was the only one of us to actually at least say hi to each one of them. And so after the day I had done the recording, I was staying one night before I flew back home, but Angela was coming. And so she was staying the night before she was doing her recording the next day. And we just had a conversation that evening that stayed with me so much. We ended up starting to talk about our different ways in our communities of living the vow of obedience. And Angela said something that really touched me. She talked about she saw for her, and this is how I remember it from 10 years ago, so feel free to.
Back in the day of the high ideals.
Angela shared that for her, she wanted to try to always say yes to anything community had asked of her. And from our conversation, I could tell that this really wasn't a pie in the sky, just ideal. She really meant it, and it was coming out of a space of trying to have the interior openness to really say yes to what she was being called to. And I remember that really stayed with me. Then she also shared about the potential for that this kind of a model of obedience could also lead to a blind obedience that could be problematic depending on how it was lived. And then I moved into reflecting on, my kind of community has its own problems with obedience. And we're not in danger of blind obedience. I would suggest that we know what I'm talking about. I would suggest that if anything in my community, perhaps we're more inclined to be too independent at times, and that if somebody is hearing some kind of limitation that they don't like, that very quickly we go to, well, we're not children, that's not how we operate, we don't just get told what to do. And so that's the shadow side for us. But at our best, I think, as my community lives obedience, it comes out of a real listening to and underneath of where God is calling us to, where the Holy Spirit's leading us in the midst of different circumstances. So just this sharing, coming at obedience from two very different perspectives was powerful to me. And I remember the moment when Angela both, I think, kind of simultaneously looked at each other and realized that she and I were having this conversation in a very genuine and open way from very different places. And we were coming to something that was similar. And I left that totally energized and wanting to replicate that kind of conversation for many more people. That sometimes there can be a sense of a divide, for example, between CMSWR communities and LCWR communities, though I believe yours belongs to both. But at 10 years ago, I felt that divide differently than I do now. And I left that conversation with Angela, and I went and I found every famous nun I could find. And I would bend her ear and tell her we needed to have more spaces where we have these kinds of conversations, and how are we, bridging this divide. Every Giving Voice thing, I'm bringing this up. And I think now it's a larger conversation, though I don't think it's all me likely, but it's part of the conversation in a different way. And I'm not suggesting that CMSWR and LCWR should all become one or something, but that we need to recognize that we need each other and each other's perspectives.
I just kind of want to go back to how have you seen
Clear the record?
How have I seen religious life? How has it changed for me this past 10 years? And actually, my reflection was on obedience, because I think it's really easy for me to, now that I've reflected on these past 10 years, to see how God has used this vow for me. Because first I made my vows, but now my vows are really making me. And I've had so many experiences that I would not have asked for, and I see how God has been forming me by giving me the courage to say yes to things that I did not necessarily look for. And one of them happened a couple years after we did this video, and I had a superior ask me, she said, we really have a need for missionaries to go to Taiwan. And I really loved what I was doing in the Bronx. I was teaching, I was really happy. And so she said, pray about it. And so I did pray about it. And my family had a really hard time with my vocation, and they had not spoken to me for most of my formation. So about 8 years, it was like kind of rocky. And they had just finally come around. And so I thought the idea of telling them that I'm going to go to Taiwan was just going to ruin a lot of our relationship. And so well, first of all, I burst out crying. I cried so hard, I burst all the vessels in my eyes. And I looked up online, how can you do this? And it said, a bad sneezing attack. So every time somebody asked me, what happened to your eyes? I was like, bad sneezing attack, so bad. And I had decided to tell my superior no, and that was a really big thing for me, to say no. And I went to confession, and the priest sat down, and I stood up. And I said, can you believe it? They're going to ask me to go to Taiwan. I cannot go to Taiwan. I cannot learn Chinese. And I walked back and forth and back and forth. And then I sat back down, and I said, and so I'm going to say no. And the priest looked at me, and he said, I was listening to you, but I never once heard you say what God wanted. And he said, I think you should go. I never saw the priest again. And I walked into the chapel and we were having Eucharistic adoration. I just looked at Jesus and I was like, why didn't you just say that? You wanted me to go to Taiwan. I mean, I'll go. I will totally go. And I remembered he said, did you have anybody in your life die recently? And I was extremely close to my grandmother. She raised me. She was from Spain. She was just like really special to me. And she had just died. And he said, pray to her. And I did. And I remember something she said to my aunt. My aunt found out that she and her husband were going to be moved in the Air Force to another country. And she said, Mom, don't you worry, because I'm praying that we don't get moved, that we're not going. And my grandmother said, you're praying for the wrong thing. Don't pray that you don't go. Pray for the courage to go. And that's what I prayed for, was the courage to go. And I found my experience as a missionary to be one of the most formative, life-changing experiences that I would have never, ever looked for. And I'm really grateful. So I think just in looking at these past 10 years, I see that my formation has continued by a desire, like an initial desire, but just growing deeper in what I have vowed. And not to say that's always been easy, because it has not, but I want it to continue to go deeper. So.
Thank you. Do you have anything you want to say? Okay.
Well, a lot has changed in the last 10 years when I look back, certainly in religious life, in my own community, just experiencing a lot of loss, I would say. We've decreased in membership. Several of our sisters have gone to heaven. We've downsized in where we live, our province center. It's much more suitable and appropriate to our needs, and we've been forced to really live more simply. We've given over sponsorship of our healthcare ministry to free us in many ways. So while there's been loss, there's also been a great sense of discernment within. It's not been without prayer, not been without discernment, not been without a deepening sense of who we are and what are we called to. So I feel like I've been supported, as a member of that congregation, with just in what God is calling me to do individually, but as a congregation. And certainly within these 10 years, I've been in vocation ministry, formation ministry, leadership, and all the time, what is God asking of me? Just trying to be aware. There's this ongoing sense, I think, of discernment in our lives. And it's been coming to me more recently, this quote by Howard Thurman. And basically it says, ask what makes you most alive, because the world needs people that are alive. And so it has been this sense of obedience, but whom is that obedience? And it's really obedience to what God's call is and being faithful to that. So I've moved out of those positions, and I'm working and caring for creation and sustainable agriculture. Like, I never thought of this as being something I would be able to do, but my congregation has been with me, and they've been very open, I think, to looking at, freeing up from these structures that are not possible with the amount of members that we are now, and just feeling there is an opening to different ways of living our charism and our spirituality, but tied into the realities of the world around us. And I think we always need to be listening to what the needs of society are. So certainly those questions that we were asked 10 years ago, I think Angela was saying, yeah, at that age and that time in our lives, that was our answer. And we've had now 10 years to really experience life, and what does that mean? Again, I think those core truths are there, and just learning to listen. I think listening is a huge thing to God, to the people we minister to our communities. And so grateful to my congregation who's just allowing God's word to be in the midst of the needs of the congregation and the needs of our world. So a lot has happened in 10 years.
Thank you. And so we're going to show the second clip from Brother Patrick on his response.
I believe that my responses gave a sense of hope to congregations that may have struggled to engage new members because of a generational gap or cultural diversity. All of our congregations have to adapt when new people join. It is important for all of us to listen and learn from each other. I am grateful for the feedback I received from various religious 10 years ago after they watched the video. I am convinced that our congregations learned from us and valued our honesty as new members. I hope that some congregations were able to follow our suggestions. I would say today to any postulant, novice, or temporary professed sister or brother to be bold in your vocation, persevere in community, and know that God is walking with you on this journey.
Thank you. And so the point of the video, one of the points of the video is that each one of us is a key to the future. It wasn't just about 8 keys to the future, and there's just not one lock or one key. Rather, we all hold the keys to the narrative of religious life today. And so we're going to begin with a video clip from Father Kevin, and the question asked was, from your lived experiences of the vows and the community, what key do you hold or share as a vowed religious? And what keys do you look for in others to collaborate across generations, cultures, and congregations?
It's crazy to think that next year will be 25 years since I entered my community. And so I answer this question in and with gratitude. I would like to think, and certainly hope that it's still the case, that I have a similar, if not the same, energy, desire, and passion for God, community, and for ministry, albeit a bit more nuanced as I reflect on my lived experience of religious life, though needing to be stirred into flame every now and then. I often joke that the 2 others who entered with me had to leave jobs, break off relationships, sell homes, even cars, when all I had to do as a 22-year-old right out of college was roll up the posters that were on my cinder block dorm room walls and then present myself as I was at the doors of the friary. While that may be true in some respect, there was something there inviting me, attracting me, calling me, even though I really had no idea what it was I was getting myself into. Not that any of us really do, of course, except that which is revealed in good discernment and by honest accompaniment. And that something, or really that someone, still invites me, still attracts me, and still calls me to deepen, to reaffirm that first yes. And to that end, and in many ways, I literally grew up as an Augustinian. As my brothers who are closest to me in community can attest, I aged in as a friar, living through most of my 20s, 30s, and now 40s in religious life. So what has sustained me? What has continued to stir into flame for me this fire of religious life? What has been a key for me? For me, it comes down to relationship. First and foremost, with God, of course, in both prayer and spirituality, but also relationship with others. Perhaps this is my own living into the twofold commandment of love, of God and neighbor without distinction. For it's the neighbors, those men and women who have accompanied me, whom I have encountered along the way, that have helped me to stay on the way. Not only my own brothers and sisters in Augustine, but also my brothers and sisters in religious life, which not so oddly enough got jump-started the years I served in vocation ministry. Encountering other religious and their respective charisms have been key for me. Indeed, they have teased out for me, have opened for me, a new and deeper understanding and expression of the vowed life, underscoring all the more what we all share in common, helping me to live this life more deeply, more authentically, more faithfully. This key is one of shared passion, one of openness, one of creativity. I saw this most pointedly when I was doing further studies in theology a few years ago, as I was living in an area where there were no Augustinian communities. By circumstance and really God's providence, I found myself living with Carmelites. As a funny aside, most of my family thought I was living with Carmelite nuns because shockingly, they had never heard of Carmelite friars. But on a more serious side, living intentionally with another charism helped me live better the charism of my own community and also appreciate what we also shared in common.
Angela, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I actually hadn't heard Kevin's response, but a lot of the things that I reflected on are very similar. And I think that word accompaniment is just really important. My current ministry is in formation, and so our members are not growing up in the community. Our postulants are in their late 20s and their 30s, and I realize the importance of walking with somebody, because I realize that that has been my formation, is that people have walked with me, and ultimately God has been with me. And I loved earlier how we talked about the migrants and that God travels, and I sense that. Another thing is also just being that whole idea of Pope Francis talks about synodality and the importance of listening to each other in a really deep way, listening to the Holy Spirit speaking through my brothers and sisters, and being humble enough to walk with someone without knowing exactly where we're going. And I feel like that is the challenge of our time, is to have such a profound faith that it's okay that we don't know exactly where we're going, but that we know God is leading the way and he's walking with us. And that's what I would add to that.
Thank you. Sister Miriam, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, Angela, add 30 years of deepening to what you just said, and I think that's the perspective from which I can speak. When I was thinking of what I had learned, I says, well, what have I been doing all these years? And I'm thinking, oh my, I served 8 years on our province leadership team, and 6 years on our congregational team, and almost 11 years working at Southdown as research director and CEO. And those times have given me the incredible graced opportunity of seeing the wonderful potential of religious life, both in individuals and in communities. They've also given me an opportunity to see the underside of all of that in terms of individuals and communities. And in it, I'll say deepened the sense of call, the sense of rightness. At the end of his comments, Kevin mentioned when he talked about the Carmelites, his respect for the difference of charisms, and yet his ability to see what's common across it. David and I wrote about some of that when we talked about the social institution of religious life. I think that we would call it now the charism of religious life, that it's bigger than charism of our individual. And that's not to diminish the charism families that exist. I'm certainly part of the Joseph family, and it's wonderful. And yet I think as I live it now, the global sisterhood is a reality. And that's not to exclude our brothers here. It's another way of expressing that sense of religious life as a life form, to one which we're called that transcends culture and age and profession, small p profession work, and ministries. It's something to which we are called, to which we share, and we know it. We know it well. We know it in our bones that it is a life form. God is the center, and how we live that out through how we understand it. Some of us through vows, some of us through primarily community, some of us through Eucharistic spirituality. All are important. but we know in our bones, and we are a commitment to this life, and it's myriad expressions, and that's exciting for me.
I would certainly agree with what Angela and Miriam are saying. When I reflected on this question, I think I found myself wandering around in the experience of these chaotic times and thinking about some questions, such as, is it okay that we really don't know what to do? And I think it has to be. It has to be okay that we really don't know what to do. And what we need then is people who can be resilient, who can live with a certain kind of ambiguity, who have imagination, and really, one thing maybe we haven't talked about as much in this last hour or so is we need to see as many different perspectives as possible and trust that somehow in the crazy quilt of charisms or perspectives and as many different ways as we can see something, that there's a larger whole that we can be a part of and continue to live into. So,
Thank you. So we're going to watch the last 3 minutes of the video, and I want each one of you to think of an answer to this question. How do we move forward in hope? So let us watch the video. This is what you said 10 years ago.
Religious life has really been a tremendous adventure.
I do believe that there is a hope for religious life here in America.
Our hope is that we are people of prayer, caring for the people in our midst and serving those who are part of our lives.
We entered knowing we were getting smaller, and we're still here. It's okay. We're not going to be done. God's going to be doing something, going to be using us. The church is going to use us in ways that we can't even imagine yet.
I'm excited about the future of religious life. I'm excited to be living in this time. There are so many neat things happening, and I would say it's clear to me that God is doing something with us, and the Spirit's gonna do something to lead us in a new way that just sounds like something that I want to be a part of.
It may be fewer people, but I still see that as a very strong indicator of the validity and necessity of religious life.
Who knows what it's going to be in 10 years, 15, 20. But I hope to still be there. You know, I still want to be in. I've put my stake in this. You know, the vows that I said how many years ago continue hopefully to be lived out, and I pray that I can be faithful to it, authentic to it, and God only knows where those vows are going to take me.
In a few months, I will be on my way to Ghana. This is a new mission that my community established, so I will be among the first pioneer. I am excited.
Well, I think the future of religious life is looking good because there are young women and men who are thinking about a vocation to religious life or to the diocesan priesthood. And even though maybe our communities won't have large numbers like it was back in the day, but still there are men and women who are considering, you know, religious life. So I feel confident that religious life will continue forever.
The bottom line is that religious life is a mystery, and part of living a mystery is that you really need to trust that this belongs to God.
Somehow it's going to be different, and it's going to grow out of what already is and what's coming. And I don't know what it's going to look like, but it's so exciting to be a part of it.
We talk about lines that lovingly haunt us. So with that, I'd like to close our conversation before we head into break, and we'll have a couple announcements. But how do we move forward and hope to hear from each one of our panelists here? Sister Anna?
You know, I guess it's a timeless message. I still just, prayer continues to be my rock. The many promises of God that keep coming to me over and over again. And like Sarah said, it's not like we see the future, but I've learned one step, you have to take a step, and then you'll see the next step. We talk so much about the future, but I truly believe if we live today, it'll show us tomorrow, and just learning that along the way. So certainly prayer and the people we encounter every day, whether it's our community members, the people I work with, the people who I encounter in ministry, they're the ones that give me hope and continue to affirm the call. That just continues to be what I fall back on. And yeah, some days, like I think Kevin said, it was one of those messages I come back to. So sometimes you got to question, and you question, but that is a sign of faith. I've learned, it's okay to question, but you take that step and see where it leads.
I think I'll pick up on your word faith. I feel like in order to move forward, the key to hope is to be men and women of deep, deep faith, and knowing that God is walking with us. And I think the image that keeps coming to me is Peter walking on the water. And the second that Peter focused on the waves and the storm, he fell. And to be able to just stay in the present moment and be open to the next step, and maybe to even imagine that it's not just Peter on the water, that it's us together on the water.
In his letter to the Ephesians, Paul wrote, "Glory to God, whose power at work in us can do infinitely more than we ask or imagine." When I look back at my life, that's been the story. And when I look at religious life in my congregation and the women and men that I've had been gifted to come to know and work with, I have that same sense. So I think that one of the keys, and that helps me go forward, is really trusting that God is with us. I know it. I feel it. I've experienced it. And we don't have to have all the answers.
I think for me, today I want to stay with that word abundance and trust that just as this way of life has always been about abundance for me as I have known it, that will continue to be into the future. And I am still eager to be a part of it.
Thank you all for sharing your hope with us. Thank you, Sarah and Miriam and Sister Debbie and Angela and Anna. We are grateful for your reminder of the universal call to religious life and that we need each other and each other's experience as we live this life. So thank you very much. We will now have a wellness break until 3 o'clock. Normally at a wellness break, it's simply a chance to walk around. Yes, but today we have refreshments at our wellness break. So there's coffee, tea, and apple treats outside in the hallway. So please enjoy those. Please do return to your tables at 3 o'clock so that we can continue our conversation generated from this panel.